They say rain washes away the past, but sometimes it brings something back. 3 true stories, 3 rainy nights. 1 rule: if you hear a knock after midnight, don't answer. They say the rain washes things away, cleans the streets, purifies the air. But that night, standing behind the cracked laminate counter of the Seaview Motel in Newport, Oregon, I realized that rain doesn't wash things away. Sometimes it just drives them out of the woods and into the light. My name is Daniel, and I was 24 years old when I took the night shift at that crumbling roadside stop. I needed the money, plain and simple. I was between jobs, my savings were dwindling, and the manager, a chain-smoking guy named Rick, told me I could sleep in the back office if I wanted. It sounded perfect. Isolation, quiet, and a paycheck. I didn't know then that the isolation was the trap. It was mid-November, the kind of weather where the sky turns a bruised purple before sunset and stays that way until dawn. The rain wasn't a storm. It was a constant heavy sheet of water that hammered against the single-pane windows of the lobby. The sound was relentless. Tap, tap, hiss, tap. It was the only thing I could hear for the first 4 hours of my shift. The Seaview was one of those old motels built in the 70s, shaped like a U around a central parking lot that was mostly gravel and weeds. There were 12 rooms, but usually only 3 or 4 were occupied. Most of the guests were truckers, looking for a few hours of sleep before hitting the I-5, or couples who didn't want to be seen. Around 2 a.m., the lobby lights flickered. It wasn't a power outage, just a surge. The fluorescent tubes buzzed like angry insects before stabilizing. I looked up from the ledger I was balancing. The ledger was old school. Rick didn't trust computers after a hacking incident years prior. Everything was written in blue ink on yellow paper. I was checking the occupancy for room 104 when the bell above the front door chimed. I hadn't heard a car pull up. The rain was too loud, masking the sound of tires on wet asphalt. I looked up, expecting a soaked trucker or maybe a lost tourist. The man who walked in wasn't wearing a coat. He was wearing a suit, dark gray, perfectly dry. Not a drop of water on his shoulders, not a damp spot on his shoes. That was the first thing that snagged in my brain. It was pouring outside. You couldn't walk from the parking lot to the door without getting drenched. He closed the door behind him gently, locking it with a turn of the deadbolt. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I sat up straighter. The man didn't look at me immediately. He looked at the key rack behind me, the wooden board with the brass keys hanging on hooks. Room numbers, 101 through 112. "I need a room," he said. His voice was flat, monotone, no accent, no emotion. "We're pretty full," I lied. "We had 8 vacancies, just for a few hours." "Until morning," he said. He finally looked at me. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they didn't blink enough. Room 112. My stomach tightened. Room 112 was at the far end of the wing, the one closest to the tree line. The woods behind the motel were dense, old-growth forests that pressed right up against the property line. 112 is under maintenance, I said. Another lie. I didn't know why I lied. Maybe it was the way he stood. Too still, like a statue waiting to be moved. "I can give you 108. It's closer to the ice machine." He didn't react to the refusal. He just reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of cash. It was all hundreds, old bills, the kind with the larger heads. He placed them on the counter. Exactly enough for the room, plus a hefty tip. 112, he repeated. "I have the key." He held up a brass key. It wasn't one of ours. Our keys had plastic red tags. This was bare metal, tarnished silver. "Where did you get that?" I asked, standing up now. My heart was hammering against my ribs. The rain outside seemed to get louder, a roaring white noise that filled the silence between us. "It fits," he said. He turned and walked toward the hallway that led to the rooms. He didn't wait for me to stop him. I should have called Rick. I should have called the police, but I was frozen. I watched him walk down the corridor. His footsteps didn't make a sound on the linoleum. I grabbed the master key and followed him. When I got to room 112, the door was already open. The light was off. I stepped inside, flashing. My phone light. The room was empty. The bed was made, untouched. The bathroom door was open, the sink dry. There was no sign of the man. I walked to the window. It was locked from the inside. There was no way he could have left without passing me. I checked the closet. Nothing. I checked under the bed. Nothing. I stood in the middle of the room, the rain hammering against the glass. I felt a cold draft coming from somewhere. I looked at the key rack in my hand. The key for 112 was still on my belt. The man had his own key. I walked back to the lobby. The front door was still locked. The deadbolt was engaged. I was alone. Told myself I imagined it. Stress, lack of sleep, the monotony of the rain. I went back to the ledger. I wrote down the time, 2:15 a.m. I tried to focus on the numbers, but my eyes kept drifting to the security monitor. It was a grainy black and white feed showing the parking lot. I saw nothing but rain streaks. At 3 a.m. the phone rang. The landline on the counter. It rarely rang at night. Most people used cell phones. I picked it up. Seaview Motel, front desk. He's in the wall, a voice whispered. It sounded like a child, but distorted, like it was coming through water. Who is this? I asked. Check the wall, the voice said. The line went dead. I hung up slowly. My hands were shaking. I looked at the wall behind the counter. It was paneling, fake wood from the 70s. I walked around the counter and tapped on it. It sounded hollow in one spot near the floor. I shouldn't have done it. I know that now. But curiosity is a dangerous thing when you're alone in the rain. I found a loose panel near the baseboard. I pried it open with my pocket knife. Behind the paneling wasn't insulation. It was a space, a small crawl space. And inside, wrapped in plastic, was a stack of journals. I pulled one out. The plastic was dry. I opened it. It was a logbook. Dates. Going back 20 years. Names of guests who had stayed in room 112. And next to each name, a date of disappearance. All of them during a rainstorm. All of them night shifts. I heard a sound behind me. Not the rain, a footstep. I turned around. The man in the suit was standing in the doorway of the office. He wasn't wet. He was never wet. You shouldn't have looked, he said. I ran. I didn't grab the phone. I didn't grab the cash. I ran out. The back door into the rain. I slipped on the wet gravel, scraping my knee, but I didn't stop. I ran to my car, which was parked under the awning. I locked the doors and drove away without turning on the headlights. I didn't stop until I was 10 miles down the highway. I never went back. I called the police from a gas station in the next town. They went to the Seaview. They said Rick was there, sleeping in the office. He said I had quit halfway through my shift and stormed out. He said there was no man in a suit. They checked. Room 1 to 12. It was empty. They checked the wall. The paneling was solid. No crawl space. I still have the journal. I kept it. I look at it sometimes when it rains. The last entry in the book is dated the night I worked. It has my name, Daniel, and next to it, the status is pending. I moved states. I changed my number. I don't work night shifts anymore. But sometimes, when the rain is heavy enough, I hear the phone ringing in my head. And I wonder if the man in the suit is still waiting for me to check out. Because in that book, nobody ever checks out. They just disappear into the rain. I always took the back road to avoid traffic, but I never considered what I might be inviting. My name is Jessica, and I live in the suburbs of Chicago. I work as a graphic designer, and like most people in my city, I rely on rideshare apps to get around when my car is in the shop. It was a Tuesday night in October, and my Honda Civic was in the shop for a transmission issue. I had finished late at the office, around 11:30 p.m. The sky had opened up an hour prior, dumping inches of water onto the highways. The news was calling it a flash flood warning. I ordered a ride. The app showed a driver named Marcus, driving a gray sedan 4 minutes away. When he pulled up, I noticed the car was older than the picture. The bumper was scratched, and the interior smelled of stale cigarette smoke, masked poorly by Pine air freshener. I got in the back seat. "Hey, thanks for coming out in this," I said, buckling up. Marcus didn't answer. He just put the car in drive. He was wearing a hoodie pulled low over his face. I didn't think much of it. Lots of drivers try to stay anonymous for safety. We merged onto the main road. The wipers were on full speed, swishing back and forth, like a metronome counting down seconds. Swish, swish, swish. "We're taking I-90, right?" I asked, looking at my phone. The GPS signal was spotty. The little blue arrow was spinning in circles. "No," Marcus said. His voice was rough. "Back roads. Highway is flooded." I checked the news app. There were no reports of flooding on I-90, but I didn't argue. He was the driver. We turned off the main road onto a stretch of county road I didn't recognize. It was darker here. The streetlights were few and far between, mostly broken or flickering. The houses were set far back from the road, hidden behind trees that whipped in the wind. "Hey, this isn't the way to my apartment," I said, noticing the landmarks were wrong. We were heading north, toward the industrial district, not west toward the residential zone. "Detour," Marcus said. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. My phone battery was at 12%. I had forgotten to charge it before leaving the office. I tried to refresh the map. No signal. "Can you pull over? I think I want to walk from here." I was trying to be polite, but my voice shook. "Can't stop," he said. "Engine stalls in the water." We drove for another 10 minutes. The rain was so heavy I couldn't see the road ahead, only the red taillights of our own reflection in the wet pavement. Then, the car slowed down. We were approaching a bridge. It was an old concrete structure, no guardrails. The water beneath, it was swollen, rushing fast and brown. Marcus stopped the car in the middle of the bridge. He put it in park. "We're here," he said. "Where is here?" I asked. I reached for the door handle. It was locked. "Unlock the door, please." Marcus turned in his seat. For the first time, I saw his face clearly in the flash of lightning. He wasn't wearing a driver's face. He looked exhausted, terrified. "I can't let you out," he whispered. "They're watching." "Who?" I asked. My hand moved slowly to my pocket where my pepper spray was. "The ones in the rain," he said. He pointed at the window. I looked. Outside, standing in the downpour on the edge of the bridge, were figures. I couldn't see how many. They were just silhouettes against the dark trees. They weren't moving. They were just standing there, facing the car. "Drive," I said. "Just drive." "I can't," Marcus said. "The car knows." "What does that mean?" "The app," he said. "It rerouted me. I've been driving this loop for 3 hours. I pick someone up, I drive to the bridge, and I can't let them off. Then the app cancels the ride, and I have to find another passenger." I looked at my phone. The screen was bright. The app showed, "Trip in progress." But the map wasn't showing a route. It was showing a circle. We were driving in a circle. I looked at the time. It was 11:30 p.m. It had been 11:30 p.m. when I got in the car. The clock wasn't moving. "This isn't real," I said. I pinched my arm. It hurt. "Look at the water," Marcus said. I looked out the window at the river below the bridge. The water wasn't flowing downriver. It was flowing up, against gravity. The rain wasn't falling down. It was hanging in the air, suspended like diamonds. Time had stopped outside the car. Inside the car, we were the only things moving. "Unlock the door," I said, my voice rising to a shout. "Unlock the damn door." Marcus started crying. I tried with the last one. She jumped. She didn't make it to the bank. I looked at him. He wasn't a kidnapper. He was a victim, trapped in the same loop. I realized the car wasn't locked by him. It was locked by the system. I looked at the dashboard. The GPS screen was glowing red. Destination reached. But we were on a bridge in the middle of nowhere. I kicked the window. It was reinforced. I couldn't break it. The figures outside started moving. They weren't walking. They were gliding over the water. They were coming toward the car. Marcus put his head in his hands. "They just want a passenger," he sobbed. I remembered something my grandfather told me about electronics and storms. Static discharge. I took off my wool sweater. I rubbed it against the plastic seat, building up a charge. I didn't know if it would work, but I had no options. The figures were at the door now. I could see their faces. They had no eyes. Just smooth skin where eyes should be. I touched the metal door handle with the sweater. A spark jumped. A loud crack echoed inside the car. The locks popped open. "Run!" I screamed. I threw the door open. The rain hit me like solid objects. It was cold, freezing cold. I jumped out onto the wet concrete of the bridge. Marcus stayed in the car. "Go," I yelled at him. He shook his head. "If I leave, the loop resets. Someone else gets picked up." Didn't wait. I ran toward the trees. The figures didn't follow me. They surrounded the car. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned, until I found a main road. A real trucker picked me up. He said I was standing on the side of Route 12, shivering. He said there was no bridge there. There hadn't been a bridge there for 20 years. It was washed out in a flood in 2004. I checked my phone. The battery was dead. When I got home and charged it, the app had no record of the ride, no Marcus, no transaction. But I still have the wool sweater. There's a burn mark on the inside pocket, a perfect circle. And sometimes, when it rains hard, my phone buzzes with a notification. Your driver has arrived. I never look outside. I just turn off the phone and wait for the sun, because I know Marcus is still driving, and he's looking for another passenger to take his place. It wasn't static on the monitor. It was breathing. That's the thing people don't understand about old houses. They settle, they creak, they groan, but they don't breathe. My name is Thomas, and I bought a fixer-upper in upstate New York because it was cheap. Real estate prices in the city were killing me, so I moved 3 hours north to a town that barely showed up on Google Maps. The house was a Victorian, built in 1920. It had high ceilings, hardwood floors, and a basement that smelled of wet earth and copper. The rain started on my third night. It was a storm system that stalled over the valley, dumping water for 48 hours straight. The ground was saturated. I was in the living room, working on my laptop, when I heard the sound. It was coming from the baby monitor. I don't have a baby. I bought the monitor to listen to the basement. The previous owner had told me there was a moisture issue down there, and he left the monitor system installed. He said it would alert me if the sump pump failed. I was sitting on the couch, a cup of coffee in hand, when the monitor crackled. It sounded like someone breathing heavily into a microphone. I walked over to the unit. The green light was blinking. Signal active. I picked up the receiver. "Hello?" I said. The breathing stopped. Then a voice. Cold. I dropped the receiver. It clattered on the table. I stared at it. The house was empty. I had locked the doors myself. I grabbed a flashlight and walked to the basement door. It was locked from the inside. I unlocked it and opened it. The stairs went down into darkness. The smell of damp earth was stronger now. It smelled like a grave. I shone the light down. Nothing. Just the furnace, the water heater, and the sump pump in the corner. I walked down the stairs, my heart pounding in my throat. The concrete floor was dry. The pump was off. I checked the window wells. They were small, rectangular windows near the ceiling of the basement. They were covered in grime. I wiped one clean with my sleeve. Outside, it was just rain and mud. I went back upstairs. I told myself it was interference. Radio waves from the storm. I sat back down. 10 minutes later, the monitor crackled again. Open. This time I didn't drop it. I grabbed it and walked to the basement door. "Who is there?" I shouted. "Open," the voice said. It sounded like my voice. Exactly like my voice, but distorted, like it was coming from underwater. I called the police. They said due to the flooding, roads were impassable. They couldn't send anyone. They told me to lock myself in a room and wait. I locked myself in the bedroom. I pushed a dresser against the door. I sat on the bed with a baseball bat. The rain was hammering the roof so hard I thought the tiles would break. Hours passed. The monitor was in the living room, but I could hear it from the bedroom. It was getting louder. The breathing was faster. Then footsteps on the monitor. I could hear footsteps walking around the living room, but I was in the bedroom. The house was small. If someone was in the living room, I would hear them through the wall. I pressed my ear against the wall. Silence. No footsteps. Just the monitor. Then the knocking started. Not on the front door. On the basement window. Tap, 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 rhythmic, deliberate. I remembered the window wells. They were at ground level. If the water rose high enough, someone could be out there. I crept to the bedroom window. It overlooked the side of the house. I looked down. The yard was flooded. The water was up to the foundation. And there, standing in the water, was a man. He was wearing a raincoat, yellow, bright against the dark. He was looking up at my window. He raised his hand and waved. I stepped back. I grabbed my phone to take a picture. When I looked again, he was gone. Just the rain. I looked at the monitor. The voice was speaking again. I'm inside. I froze. I looked at the bedroom door. The dresser was still against it, but the handle was turning. Slowly. Someone was on the other side. I hadn't heard them come up the stairs. I hadn't heard them walk down the hall. Open, the voice said. From the other side of the door, I swung the bat. Stay back. It's me, the voice said. I'm you. The handle stopped turning. The silence that followed was heavier than the rain. I waited for an hour. Nothing. I called the police again. They put me on hold. When they came back, they said there was no record of my call. They said my number wasn't in the system. I stayed in that room until morning. When the sun came up, the rain stopped. I opened the door. The house was empty. The living room was undisturbed. I went to the basement. The window well was filled with mud. But in the mud there were handprints, small handprints. And inside the house, on the floor of the living room, there were wet footprints. They led from the basement door to the bedroom door, and then they stopped. I sold the house a week later. I took a loss. I didn't tell the real estate agent why. I just said I needed to move back to the city. I left the baby monitor there. I couldn't bring myself to take it. But sometimes when it rains, I get a signal on my phone. A Bluetooth connection request. The device name is Basement Unit. I always decline it. But last week I accepted it by mistake. There was no audio. Just a text message on the screen. It said, "You left the window open. I live in an apartment now, on the 4th floor. There are no basements. There are no window wells. But yesterday I came home from work and there was water on my floor. Just a puddle near the door, and the smell. Wet earth and copper. I checked the locks. They were engaged. I checked the windows. They were closed. But on the glass, on the inside, there was a handprint. In condensation. I don't know what followed me home. I don't know if it was the house, or the rain, or something that lives in the space between them. But I know one thing. It's patient. It can wait for the next storm. And when the rain starts, I don't sleep. I sit by the door with the bat, because I know that whatever is out there, it doesn't need to break in. It just needs me to open the window. And the breathing is getting louder.